it's so obviously the most miraculous thing to do. I have to remind myself that not everyone in the world actually wants to be a poet. Many people aren't even remotely interested in it, but it's so clear to me that, of course, it's what you want to do.
Louise Glück has won, as you know, almost every prize given to any poet in this country. One of the great poets of our time will be a daily figure on this campus. Someone known as a gifted and dedicated and generous teacher will now offer those services to our students. Please join me in welcoming Louise Glück.
I'm going to read new poems this afternoon. I began writing for the first time in about 2 years and 1 month. And that silence had become oppressive and frightening, as such silences usually do in life. And then I began writing very rapidly. And about 5 weeks later, this book materialized. The next poem has 5 sections. It's called Landscape. In late autumn, a young girl set fire to a field of wheat. The autumn had been very dry. The field went up like tinder. Afterward, there was nothing left. You walk through it, you see nothing. There's nothing to pick up, to smell. The horses don't understand it. Where is the field, they seem to say. The way you and I would say, where is home? No one knows how to answer them. There is nothing left. You have to hope for the farmer's sake the insurance will pay. It is like losing a year of your life. To what would you lose a year of your life? Afterward, you go back to the old place. All that remains is char, blackness, and emptiness. You think, how could I live here? But it was different then, even last summer. The earth behaved as though nothing could go wrong with it. One match was all it took, but at the right time, it had to be the right time. The field parched, dry, the deadness in place already, so to speak.
Louise uses plain language. It can almost seem like someone's speaking to you, just spontaneously, but it's always immensely distinguished. I don't know if there's a writer alive in prose or verse who avoids cliché so scrupulously. There's always a surprise in Louise's writing. Every turn, every sentence, every line, something goes somewhere a little different, or sometimes very different from the place you thought it would go.
Louise Glück resides on a quiet side street in Cambridge, Massachusetts. A person who values her privacy, she lives by herself and divides her time between writing poetry, teaching at various universities, and tending to her garden.
When did you first become interested in poetry?
From the time I was 4 or 5, I was reading, and I happened on anthologies and read, I remember Blake especially, and then the songs from Shakespeare's plays, and it seemed to me that this was the language I wanted to speak. These were the people I wanted to be in dialogue with. It didn't bother me that they were dead. I thought that if my language were good enough, it would reach them.
Born in New York in 1943, Glück grew up on Long Island in comfortable circumstances. Her father originally wanted to be a writer, but instead turned to business. In 1972, he invented a widely used retractable knife called the X-Acto. Her mother was a strong-willed woman who had a major influence on Glück's early years.
I came from a family in which anytime the child showed any aptitude for any art, it got lessons. The child sat at the piano, it got piano lessons. The child spinned around the dining table, dance. Put together a nice dress, painting.
Did you have a happy childhood?
No, I didn't. I also had a horrific adolescence. But I think that such periods early in life push one inward in a certain way that ends up, if you find yourself wishing to be an artist, profitable. Imagination is cultivated. Private resources are turned to. And I think that you have also, when you get to more trying periods in adulthood, less sense of shock, because nothing seems to you quite as arduous as that childhood. I was also, from the time I was about 15 or 16, increasingly and quite terrifyingly anorexic, so that at a certain point, I mean, this has become now a very common story. In those days it was less common. At a certain point I weighed about 75 pounds. That's about, 30 pounds less than I weigh now. Anorexia was my way of fighting for the ownership of my body. I wanted to show my mother that it was mine. What I didn't realize was that I was going to die. And when I realized I was going to die, I was terrified, because I remember thinking, I want a chance to write my poems. The encounter. You came to the side of the bed and sat staring at me. Then you kissed me. I felt hot wax on my forehead. I wanted it to leave a mark. That's how I knew I loved you, because I wanted to be burned, stamped, to have something in the end. I drew the gown over my head. A red flush covered my face and shoulders. It will run its course, the course of fire, setting a cold coin on the forehead between the eyes. You lay beside me. Your hand moved over my face as though you had felt it also. You must have known then how I wanted you. We will always know that, you and I. The proof will be my body. I can never tell when I'm going to write, never. And if I knew how to position myself to receive those stimuli, I would. Because I'm exhilarated when I'm working and usually unhappy when I'm not. All I know is that I don't want the substitute. I don't want the ersatz. I don't want the phony. I don't want the glib. I don't want the facile. I don't want, she's just writing like her old, we've heard this before. I don't want to do those things. So you wait to make a new sound, to hear some voices in your head that you haven't heard before. I started working on something and it was really bad. It was crummy, But I was really so happy just to be working on a little crummy thing. And I would get home and I would think it's waiting for me. I would have that draft on the counter, and I would move it from room to room, and I would look at it, and each time I looked at it, it was still the same. I was sitting in bed with my draft and reading it, and all of a sudden I thought, I know what this needs. It needs a swerve. It needs German. It needs a German line. But I don't speak German. So I called one of my friends and I said, how do you say this in German? In the silence of consciousness, I asked myself, why did I reject my life? And I answer, die Erde überwältigt mich. The earth defeats me.
When do you know when a poem's finished?
The poem banishes you, sends you away, tells you it's complete. The doors to it aren't open anymore.
She's actually very like her poems. She often, the things she says about the world cut through in a way that, as I was saying, very little contemporary poetry cuts through. It's very much true of her presence in the world. She's as tough on herself as she is on anybody else. This is a poem called First Memory. It's a good example of how Louise can use very simple language to embody something that's complex, that cuts to the heart of things, that's what I mean by this apprehension of an inevitable fate, fatality, necessity. First memory. Long ago, I was wounded. I lived to revenge myself against my father, not for what he was, for what I was. From the beginning of time, in childhood, I thought that pain meant I was not loved. It meant I loved.
Louise Glück's first poems were published when she was 25. It was the beginning of an auspicious writing and teaching career. Over the years, Glück has written 10 books of poetry and has been honored with a host of awards, including a Pulitzer Prize, the National Book Critics Circle Award, and the Bollingen Prize. In 2003, Louise Glück was named Poet Laureate by the Library of Congress.
It seems to me that I've treasured the fantasy that I am a very funny person, but it's seemed to me true for a long time that that wasn't on the page. I didn't necessarily think it was a quality to be prized over all other qualities of speech, but it seemed curious that it was never in my poems. And I think it wasn't until Ararat that it materialized. When you fall in love, my sister said, it's like being struck by lightning. She was speaking hopefully to draw the attention of the lightning. I reminded her that she was repeating exactly our mother's formula, which she and I had discussed in childhood, because we both felt that what we were looking at in the adults were the effects not of lightning, but of the electric chair. I've been married twice. The first time very, very briefly, 9 months. The second time for a long time. In between, there were, well, and before and after, other relationships. I tended for a long time to have relationships that would last about 2 years. And then he would go or I would go.
You write a lot about the past, about your childhood. Could you talk a little bit about your relationship with that time? How it changes?
I find an individual history as useful a place to begin as any. It's the material I know best, after all. I think that you can see that fact more clearly when you think in terms of love affairs. I mean, I'm talking about a love affair that has ended so that it is an entirety, a succinct memory. And initially you'll feel one set of things. 10 years later you'll think, oh, that wasn't what was going on at all. 10 years later you'll think, that wasn't what was going on. And so one of the interesting things about the past is how it accumulates these layers and densities as you get older. Because you're not just looking at the past, you're looking at your versions of it.
Mock orange. It is not the moon, I tell you. It is these flowers lighting the yard. I hate them. I hate them as I hate sex. The man's mouth sealing my mouth. The man's paralyzing body. And the cry that always escapes. The low, humiliating premise of union. In my mind tonight, I hear the question and pursuing answer fused in one sound that mounts and then is split into the old selves, the tired antagonisms. Do you see? We were made fools of, and the scent of mock orange drifts through the window. How can I rest? How can I be content when there is still that odor in the world?
I hate poetry readings. I hate them. I don't like going to them. I don't like giving them. I feel when I'm hearing a poem in someone else's, that the poet has intervened between me and the poem, that there are multiplicities of ways the poem speaks from the page, which the human voice can't reproduce. If you see something on the page, you get a web, a constellation. The way that a line ends will send you backward into the poem as well as forward, so that you live in the universe of it. The discovery of teaching was a miracle, because there was always that terrible sense of what to do with all the time that wasn't being, in which I wasn't writing. And in my case, there was usually a great deal of time that wasn't spent writing. What I found in teaching was a way to use the part of my brain that was used in the making of poems, even when I wasn't writing, because I could use it on other people's work. Moreover, I could learn from that work. And I liked the idea that I was in the presence always of the malleable, the inchoate, the forming, the evolving, as opposed to the finished, the published, the printed, the unapproachable. The last poem I'll read tonight is a poem in 6 sections. It's called October. Snow had fallen. I remember music from an open window. Come to me, said the world. This is not to say it spoke in exact sentences, but that I perceived beauty in this manner. Sunrise, a film of moisture on each living thing, Pools of cold light formed in the gutters. I stood at the doorway, ridiculous as it now seems. What others found in art, I found in nature. What others found in human love, I found in nature. Very simple, but there was no voice there. Winter was over. In the thawed dirt, bits of green were showing. Come to me, said the world. I was standing in my wool coat at a kind of bright portal. I can finally say, long ago. It gives me considerable pleasure. Beauty, the healer, the teacher. Death cannot harm me more than you have harmed me, my beloved life.
I'm going to object to age or ill health or death as they occur. But there might be a poem in it, and it's a poem I couldn't write young. That's a great consolation to me. I don't know what I would do in the absence of that.
I won't keep it forever, but I'll cherish it forever.